Hashtag the hook in the scorching heat of a remote military outpost, where survival depended on routine and trust. Everyone knew Maria Santos as the quiet cook who served meals with a gentle smile. She had calloused hands from years of peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, and stirring massive pots that fed hundreds of hungry soldiers. Her weathered apron told stories of countless kitchen battles fought with flour and spice rather than bullets and blood. But what the enemy infiltrators didn't know as they breached the kitchen doors that fateful night was that beneath those flour-dusted hands lay the trained reflexes of someone who had once moved through enemy territory like a shadow. They saw an easy target, a middle-aged woman surrounded by pots and pans. They never suspected they had just walked into the domain of former Force Reconnaissance Marine Sergeant Maria Santos, a woman whose kitchen knives were about to become instruments of precision that would remind 15 armed intruders why Marines never truly retire. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you least suspect. Sometimes the cook isn't just serving dinner, she's serving justice. Maria Santos wiped her hands on her apron as the last of the evening dinner service wound down. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Blackwater was finally quiet, save for the distant hum of generators and the occasional radio chatter from the communications tent. She moved through her kitchen with practiced efficiency, cleaning the industrial-sized pots that had held tonight's beef stew, her movements precise and methodical. At 42, Maria had been working as the head cook at this remote outpost in Afghanistan for nearly 3 years. The soldiers who passed through her chow line knew her as the woman who always had a kind word and an extra portion for those who looked particularly worn down by their duties. She knew their names, their hometowns, and which ones were nursing heartbreak from Dear John letters. To them, she was simply Maria, the cook who made the best cornbread this side of Kansas, and somehow managed to make military rations taste like home cooking. What they didn't know was that 15 years earlier, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been crawling through enemy territory in Iraq, gathering intelligence and eliminating high-value targets as part of an elite force reconnaissance unit. Her hands, now gentle as they ladled food onto trays, had once been instruments of precision in life and death situations that would have broken lesser warriors. She had left that life behind after a mission went wrong, taking shrapnel to her left leg and watching her team leader bleed out in her arms while waiting for extraction. The physical wounds healed, but the invisible ones had sent her seeking peace in places where the only battles were fought against hunger and homesickness. The kitchen had become her sanctuary, a place where she could nurture instead of neutralize, where her tactical mind could focus on feeding people rather than eliminating them. Tonight felt different, though. Maria paused in her cleaning, her hands stilling on the large metal spoon she was washing. Her instincts, honed by years of training and sharpened by combat experience, were sending signals she couldn't ignore. The pattern of radio chatter had changed. The usual banter between the night watch had been replaced by terse, professional exchanges. Even the ambient sound seemed wrong, too quiet in some areas, too active in others. She moved to the small window that looked out over the compound. The base was laid out in a rough rectangle, surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, their searchlights sweeping the perimeter in regular patterns. Everything appeared normal, but Maria's trained eye caught details others might miss. The searchlight in Tower 3 was lingering too long on the eastern approach. Guard rotation should have happened 20 minutes ago, but she could see the same silhouette in Tower 2. Maria dried her hands slowly, her mind automatically shifting into assessment mode. It could be nothing, equipment malfunction, delayed rotation, or just paranoid instincts from someone who had seen too much combat. But Force Recon had taught her that paranoia kept you alive, and dismissed instincts got you killed. She walked to the industrial refrigerator and opened it, ostensibly checking tomorrow's inventory, while actually positioning herself to have a clear view of the kitchen's 2 entrances. The main entrance faced the mess hall, while the back entrance opened onto a narrow alley between the kitchen building and the motor pool. Both doors were solid steel with reinforced frames, designed to keep out everything from dust storms to mortar fragments. The lights in the mess hall dimmed as the night shift took over. Maria continued her routine cleanup, but her movements became more purposeful. She positioned her knife roll near the prep station, the familiar weight of the blades a comfort she hadn't felt the need for in years. Her favorite cleaver, a German steel beauty that could split bone as easily as it chopped vegetables, found its way to the cutting board nearest the back entrance. The first sign of real trouble came at 2:15 a.m. Maria was finishing her inventory reports when the power flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the sudden silence, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The distinctive whine of cutting torches working on metal. They weren't cutting through the perimeter fencing. The sound was too close, too muffled. Someone was cutting through the reinforced doors. Maria moved with fluid precision, her body remembering training that had been drilled into her until it became instinct. She killed the emergency lights in the kitchen, plunging herself into darkness while leaving the rest of the building illuminated. To anyone breaching the entrances, she would be invisible while they would be silhouetted against the dim red glow from the corridor. The cutting stopped. Footsteps whispered across concrete. Too many footsteps for a standard patrol. At least 8 sets, moving in coordinated patterns. These weren't random insurgents or opportunistic raiders. This was a planned assault by people who knew the base layout and had studied the guard rotations. Maria pulled her hair back and secured it with a rubber band, a ritual from her combat days that meant business was about to get serious. She selected her knives with the same care a sniper chose ammunition, the long, flexible boning knife for quick strikes, the heavy cleaver for close combat, and her favorite paring knife, small enough to be concealed but sharp enough to find the gaps in body armor. The back entrance exploded inward with a flash of white light and the acrid smell of thermite. Smoke filled the kitchen as dark figures poured through the breach, their movements professional and coordinated. Night vision goggles reflected the dim emergency lighting like insect eyes as they spread out to clear the room. They were speaking in hushed tones, a mixture of accented English and what sounded like Pashto. Maria counted at least 7 voices, all male, all moving with military precision. Their equipment was too good for local insurgents, modern rifles, tactical gear, and coordinated assault techniques that spoke of professional training. The lead figure gestured toward the main entrance while 2 others moved to secure the kitchen. They thought they were clearing an empty room. They had no idea they were walking into the domain of someone who had learned to kill silently in a dozen different countries. Maria's first target was the man checking the walk-in freezer. He was young, nervous, and had made the fatal mistake of separating himself from his team by 3 critical steps. She moved behind him like a shadow, her approach masked by his own equipment noise and heavy breathing. The boning knife slid between his ribs with surgical precision, angled upward to find his heart. He dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering softly against the freezer door. 1 down. At least 14 to go. The second target was scanning the prep area with his rifle when Maria's cleaver took him in the neck from behind. The heavy blade sheared through muscle and vertebrae with a wet crunch that was masked by his partner's radio chatter. She caught his body as it fell, lowering him silently to the floor beside the industrial mixer. 2 down. The remaining attackers were starting to spread out through the beam of a tactical flashlight, swept across the spot where Maria had been crouched just seconds earlier. She had already moved, flowing like liquid shadow behind the massive bread ovens that formed the kitchen's central island. Her breathing was controlled and silent, a skill drilled into her during countless hours of training in environments where a single misplaced breath could mean death. The assault team leader was barking orders in accented English, his voice tight with growing concern. Alpha team, report. Beta team, secure the dining area. Someone is in here with us. His tactical assessment was accurate, but incomplete. He was thinking in terms of a single guard, or maybe a sleepy cook who had gotten lucky. He had no concept of what 15 years of force recon training could do when cornered in familiar territory. Maria listened to their movements, building a mental map of their positions. 8 voices now, which meant at least 5 more were somewhere in the building. They were splitting up, a tactical mistake, when facing an unknown threat in close quarters. Her instructors at Quantico would have failed them for breaking the fundamental rule of maintaining unit cohesion in confined spaces. The 4th target made his fatal error when he decided to clear the pantry alone. Maria was waiting behind the industrial flour barrels when he entered, his rifle sweeping left while his attention focused on the shelving units. She moved behind him like death itself, one hand covering his mouth, while her paring knife found the base of his skull. The blade slipped between vertebrae with the precision of a surgeon, severing his spinal cord instantly. He went limp in her arms, his finger never reaching the trigger. For down. But the body would be discovered within minutes. She dragged him deeper into the pantry and began working on his equipment. The tactical radio was encrypted, but she could still monitor their communications. His rifle was a high-end AR platform with an expensive optic, military-grade equipment that confirmed these weren't ordinary insurgents. The man's gear bore no identifying marks, but his weapons and tactics screamed professional military training. Through the radio, she heard the team leader repositioning his forces. They had found the first body and were adapting their tactics. Smart, but not smart enough. Maria moved to her backup position behind the commercial dishwashing station. The massive machine provided excellent cover while offering multiple escape routes through the adjoining prep areas. From here, she could monitor both entrances while remaining invisible to anyone without night vision. The fifth target entered the kitchen through the blast hole they had created in the back door. He was more cautious than his predecessors, moving with his rifle ready and checking his corners properly. Maria waited until he passed her position before rising behind him like a nightmare given form. This time she used the cleaver, the heavy blade taking his head nearly clean off in a single devastating stroke. The sound was masked by the ambient noise of the building's ventilation systems. 5 down. The odds were improving, but the assault team was learning. She could hear them coordinating over the radio, establishing overwatch positions, and creating crossing fields of fire. They had realized they were dealing with a skilled combatant, and were adapting their tactics accordingly. The team leader was calling for backup from the external teams, which meant Maria's window of opportunity was closing rapidly. She moved through the kitchen's service corridor, using her knowledge of the building's layout to stay ahead of their search pattern. The corridor connected the kitchen to the main dining area through a series of service doors designed to allow staff to move invisibly during meal service. Now those same pathways would become arteries of war. The sixth target was positioned at the junction between the kitchen and dining area, providing overwatch for his teammates. He was disciplined, maintaining his position while others moved to clear the adjacent spaces. Maria approached from above, using the suspended pot racks as a pathway across the ceiling. The leverage allowed her to drop onto him from directly overhead, her weight driving the boning knife down through his collarbone and into his heart. He died before his finger could find the radio button. 6 down. Halfway there. The radio chatter was becoming increasingly urgent. The team leader was now treating this as a combat situation rather than a simple breach and clear operation. Orders flew back and forth as they tried to establish contact with the external teams and coordinate a systematic sweep of the entire building. Maria retrieved the dead man's radio and listened to their communications. The news wasn't good. 3 more teams were positioned around the compound perimeter, and a vehicle team was standing by for extraction. This wasn't a raid. It was a full-scale assault on the base, timed to coincide with a shift change when security would be at its minimum. She had to end this quickly before the external teams realized their assault element was being systematically eliminated. The 7th target was smarter than his predecessors. He entered the kitchen as part of a 2-man team, maintaining visual contact with his partner while they conducted a methodical room-by-room search. They were using proper tactical movement, covering each other's advances, and communicating constantly through hand signals. Maria decided to use their coordination against them. She positioned herself in the walk-in freezer, leaving the door slightly ajar and arranging one of the bodies to be visible from the entrance. When the 2-man team discovered the corpse, they would have to enter the confined space to investigate exactly where she wanted them. The plan worked perfectly. The lead man entered the freezer while his partner provided security from the doorway. Maria was waiting in the darkness beyond the light spill, her cleaver ready. The first man died instantly as the heavy blade split his skull from crown to jaw. Before his partner could react, Maria's paring knife was already in flight, taking him in the throat with deadly accuracy. 7 down. 8 down. But The radio erupted with activity as the team leader realized he had lost contact with another two-man team. Orders were shouted in multiple languages as the remaining forces converged on the kitchen area. Maria could hear boots pounding against concrete as reinforcements rushed toward her position. She had perhaps 60 seconds before the kitchen would be flooded with armed hostiles. Time to change tactics. Maria moved to the industrial gas lines that fed the massive cookie. The remaining 7 attackers moved into the kitchen with professional precision, their rifles tracking across the emergency lighting as they searched for targets. Their team leader was directing the sweep through hand signals, having learned enough about their invisible enemy to maintain radio silence during the assault. They had found 8 of their teammates dead and were treating this like the combat situation it had become. Maria crouched behind the prep counter, her stolen rifle ready and her improvised gas trap primed. The concentration wasn't quite high enough for an explosion, but it would serve her purposes perfectly. Gas exposure in an enclosed space would affect their reaction times and cloud their judgment within minutes. In a firefight measured in seconds, even small advantages could mean the difference between life and death. The first 2 attackers moved toward the walk-in freezer where their teammates had died. They were good, maintaining proper spacing and checking their corners systematically. But they made the mistake of stepping into Maria's killing ground at the exact moment she had been waiting for. She emerged from behind the prep counter like a hurricane of controlled violence, her rifle spitting fire in controlled bursts. The first attacker went down with 3 rounds center mass before he could swing his weapon around. The second managed to get his rifle up, but caught Maria's 4th and 5th rounds in the head, his night vision goggles exploding in a shower of sparks and plastic. 9 down. 10 down. The kitchen erupted in gunfire as the remaining 5 attackers opened up on her position. Bullets sparked off stainless steel surfaces and punched through aluminum prep tables as Maria rolled behind the industrial dishwasher. The heavy machine absorbed dozens of rounds while she counted muzzle flashes and tracked firing positions. She had lost the element of surprise, but she still held every other advantage. This was her territory, and she knew every angle, every piece of cover, every sight line in the room. The attackers were fighting blind in an unfamiliar environment while dealing with increasing gas exposure that was making them sluggish and disoriented. Maria moved to her next position using the suspended pot racks as partial cover. The route took her above the main firing line while keeping her hidden from the night vision equipment the remaining attackers were using. She could see them clearly now, 5 professionals in tactical gear, moving with the precision of Special Operations Forces. Too bad they had never faced a Force Recon Marine on her home ground. The 11th target was providing overwatch near the main entrance, his position designed to prevent anyone from escaping through the dining area. Maria approached from an impossible angle, using the ceiling-mounted equipment tracks to get directly above him. Her knife work was swift and silent, a single thrust through the top of his skull that dropped him without a sound. 11 down. The remaining 4 had realized their overwatch was down and were adapting their positions. The team leader was speaking rapidly into his radio, calling for immediate backup from the external teams. Maria could hear vehicle engines starting up outside the building as reinforcements prepared to storm her position. She had perhaps 2 minutes before this became a siege she couldn't win. The 12th target made the mistake of trying to flank her through the service corridor. Maria was waiting with her cleaver, the heavy blade taking his arm off at the shoulder before reversing to split his skull down the middle. He hit the floor in 2 pieces, his rifle clattering uselessly beside his severed limb. 12 down. But his death scream had alerted the others to her position. Gunfire erupted from multiple angles as the remaining 3 attackers converged on the service corridor. Maria rolled deeper into the prep area as bullets destroyed hundreds of dollars worth of kitchen equipment around her. The gas concentration was affecting them now. She could see them struggling to maintain their aim as the fumes clouded their judgment and slowed their reflexes. One attacker was weaving slightly as he moved, his equilibrium affected by the chemical exposure. Maria decided to end this before the backup teams arrived. She triggered the commercial fire suppression system, filling the kitchen with dense foam that killed visibility and made movement treacherous. The automated system was designed to smother grease fires, but It worked equally well for creating tactical concealment in the middle of a gunfight. Moving through the foam like a ghost, Maria stalked the 13th target as he stumbled blindly through the white mist. Her approach was silent and deadly, the boning knife sliding between his ribs to find his heart. He dropped without seeing his killer, his rifle disappearing into the foam beside his body. 13 down. The 14th target was firing blindly through the foam, his rounds going wide as the gas exposure and fire suppressant combined to destroy his ability to fight effectively. Maria came at him from the side, her cleaver taking his head off in a single devastating blow that sent arterial spray across the white foam like abstract art painted in blood. 14 down. 1 left. The team leader was the last man standing, and he knew it. Maria could hear him speaking rapidly into his radio, demanding immediate extraction while fighting to maintain consciousness in the gas-filled, foam-covered nightmare his tactical situation had become. She found him near the blast hole they had created in the back door, trying to reach fresh air while maintaining security on his flanks. He was good. Even poisoned and half-blind, he was still moving with professional discipline and keeping his rifle ready. But good wasn't enough when facing someone who had been forged in the crucible of the world's most elite military training. Maria appeared out of the foam like death incarnate, her rifle tracking onto his center mass before he could react. But instead of firing immediately, she spoke for the first time since the assault began. "Who sent you?" Her voice was calm and professional, the tone of someone conducting a tactical interrogation. The team leader's rifle swung toward her voice, but Maria was already moving. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and sending his weapon flying into the foam. He hit the floor hard, his tactical gear clattering against the concrete. "I asked you a question," Maria said, emerging from the mist with her rifle trained on his head. "Who sent you? And what were you after?" The man's eyes were wide with shock and pain, but also with something else, recognition. He was staring at her face as if he had seen a ghost. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered in accented English. "The Santos file said you were killed in Fallujah." Maria felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. Someone had been tracking her, had access to classified military records, and had believed her dead for 15 years. This wasn't a random attack on the base. This was personal. "Wrong, Santos," she said quietly, pressing the rifle barrel against his forehead. "That was my sister. Now answer the question before I paint the wall with your brains." The reinforcement teams poured into the kitchen like water through a broken dam, their automatic weapons cutting through the dissipating foam as they searched for targets. Maria counted at least 12 more hostiles, all moving with the same professional precision as the team she had just eliminated. They had learned from their predecessors' mistakes and were maintaining unit cohesion while systematically clearing the room. But they had made one critical error. They were fighting Maria's war now, in her territory, by her rules. She triggered the kitchen's secondary gas line, flooding the room with a different type of vapor, propane from the backup cooking system. Unlike the natural gas she had released earlier, propane was heavier than air and would pool in the lower areas of the room where the assault teams were moving. All she needed was a spark. The wounded team leader was still calling out warnings in his foreign tongue, but his reinforcements were too focused on the tactical situation to fully appreciate what he was trying to tell them. They saw a kitchen filled with foam and bodies, evidence of a fierce fight, but not necessarily an ongoing threat. They thought they were conducting a cleanup operation. Maria proved them wrong with extreme prejudice. She emerged from behind the industrial refrigerator with a rifle in each hand, firing in controlled bursts that dropped 3 attackers before they could react. Her years of force recon training had included extensive work with dual-wielding techniques, and she moved through their formation like a deadly dancer, each shot finding its mark with surgical precision. 16 down, 17 down, 18 down. But the remaining 9 had identified her position and were concentrating their fire. The refrigerator began to disintegrate under the sustained assault, its stainless steel skin peeling away in long strips as hundreds of rounds tore through the appliance. Maria rolled deeper into the kitchen, using the maze of equipment and prep stations to break their sight lines while searching for better firing positions. The propane concentration was building to dangerous levels, and She could see some of the attackers beginning to show the effects of gas exposure, slower reflexes, impaired judgment, and the telltale wobble of oxygen deprivation. She needed to end this before the gas reached explosive concentrations. A single muzzle flash in the wrong place would turn the entire kitchen into a crematorium with her inside it. The 19th target was trying to flank her through the service corridor, the same route where his predecessor had died. Maria was ready for him, her cleaver taking his head clean off as he rounded the corner. Blood painted the corridor walls in abstract patterns as his body collapsed in a heap of tactical gear and severed flesh. 19 down. But his death scream had revealed Maria's position to the remaining attackers. They were converging on the service corridor from multiple directions, their weapons ready, and their movements coordinated. She was about to be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run. Time for desperate measures. Maria pulled the pin from a fragmentation grenade she had taken from one of the earlier casualties. But instead of throwing it immediately, she held onto the armed explosive while counting down the fuse timer. She needed the detonation to be perfectly timed for maximum effect. At the 3-second mark, she rolled the grenade into the main kitchen area and triggered the emergency ventilation system. The massive exhaust fans roared to life, creating a wind tunnel effect that would channel the blast and shrapnel in a controlled direction while simultaneously clearing some of the accumulated gas. The explosion was devastating. The grenade detonated in the center of the assault team's formation, sending razor-sharp fragments through tactical gear and flesh with equal ease. Screams echoed through the kitchen as 4 more attackers went down in a welter of blood and twisted metal. 20 down, 21 down, 22 down, 23 down. But the blast had also ignited some of the accumulated propane, creating a rolling fireball that swept across the ceiling and walls. The kitchen was beginning to burn, thick smoke mixing with the remaining gas vapors to create a toxic atmosphere that would kill anyone who stayed too long. Maria grabbed a tactical respirator from one of the dead attackers and strapped it over her face. The breathing apparatus would give her perhaps 10 minutes of clean air, enough time to finish this fight and escape before the building became uninhabitable. The remaining assault team members were in disarray. The explosion had broken their formation and the spreading fire was forcing them to retreat toward the exits. But Maria wasn't going to let them escape that easily. They had come here to kill, and she intended to finish what they had started. She stalked the 24th target through the burning kitchen, using the smoke and flames as concealment while closing to knife-fighting distance. The man was choking on the toxic fumes and firing wildly at shadows when Maria's boning knife found his carotid artery. He died still pulling the trigger, his rounds sparking off the ceiling as his blood joined the other fluids on the kitchen floor. 24 down. The final attacker was the smartest of the bunch. He had retreated to the blast hole in the back door and was maintaining overwatch on both entrances while calling for extraction on his radio. His position gave him clear fields of fire and a ready escape route if the situation deteriorated further. But he had forgotten about the ventilation system. Maria climbed into the exhaust ductwork, using the industrial-sized passages to move above his position undetected. The metal was hot from the fire, and the sharp edges cut into her hands as she crawled through the confined space. But she had endured worse during her military training. She dropped down behind him like an angel of death, her cleaver already in motion before he realized she was there. The heavy blade split his skull from crown to jaw, spilling brains and blood across the concrete floor in a final exclamation point to the battle. 25 down. But as the last attacker fell, Maria heard the sound that every warrior fears, more vehicles approaching at high speed. Through the radio chatter of the dead men around her, she learned that this assault team had been just the advance element. The main force was still coming. She had perhaps 5 minutes before the base would be overrun by professional soldiers who now knew exactly what they were facing. The element of surprise was gone, and she was alone in a burning building with limited ammunition and no backup. But Maria Santos had been in hopeless situations before. Force Recon Marines were trained to improvise, adapt, and overcome any obstacle through superior tactics and unbreakable will. The kitchen battle was over, but the war for forward operating base Blackwater was just beginning. She gathered weapons and ammunition from the fallen attackers while mentally cataloging the base's defensive positions and supply caches. If these people wanted a fight, she would give them one they would never forget. Maria moved through the burning kitchen like a ghost collecting the tools of war. Her arms were loaded with tactical rifles, ammunition magazines, and fragmentation grenades taken from the 25 dead attackers scattered throughout her domain. The smoke was getting thicker, and the structural fires were spreading to the dining area, but she needed every piece of equipment she could carry for what was coming next. The radio chatter told her everything she needed to know. The main assault force consisted of 3 mechanized teams with armored vehicles, heavy weapons, and air support standing by. They had been monitoring the advanced team's communications and knew their assault element had been completely eliminated by a single defender. Now they were treating this like a siege operation against a fortified position. They still didn't understand what they were really facing. Maria escaped the burning kitchen through a maintenance tunnel that connected to the base's underground utility network. The tunnels were cramped and filled with pipes and electrical conduits, but they provided concealed movement between buildings and access to strategic positions throughout the compound. Her force recon training had included extensive work in urban warfare and tunnel fighting, skills that were about to prove invaluable. She emerged in the communications building, where the night shift radio operators lay dead at their posts. The attackers had eliminated them silently during their initial infiltration, cutting the base's ability to call for help or coordinate with higher command. But they had left the equipment intact, probably planning to use it for their own communications during the assault. That was their second major mistake. Maria activated the emergency beacon system, sending a priority distress signal to every military installation within 500 miles. The coded transmission would bring air support, quick reaction forces, and enough firepower to turn this remote outpost into the epicenter of a major military operation within hours. But hours were exactly what she didn't have. The first armored vehicle crashed through the base's main gate at 0347 hours, its heavy machine gun already firing at the guard towers. 2 more vehicles followed, spreading out to establish a perimeter while dismounted infantry moved to secure key buildings. They were professionals conducting a textbook assault on a fixed installation. Maria watched them from the communications building's second-floor window, counting personnel and identifying equipment types. 36 soldiers total, armed with automatic weapons and supported by 3 up-armored vehicles mounting heavy machine guns and grenade launchers. Against any normal defender, these odds would be insurmountable. But Force Recon Marines weren't normal defenders. She waited until they had spread out through the compound before making her first move. The motor pool was her initial target, a building filled with vehicles, fuel, and maintenance equipment that could be turned into weapons with the right application of military explosives. Maria moved through the underground tunnels like water through a pipe system, emerging directly beneath the motor pool floor through a maintenance access panel. The building was unguarded, the assault team having dismissed it as a low-priority target during their initial sweep. They were about to learn the difference between low priority and irrelevant. She rigged the fuel storage tanks with improvised explosive devices, using military demolitions techniques to create a series of timed charges that would turn the entire building into a massive secondary explosion. The blast would be visible from orbit and would announce to every hostile in the area that this base was defended by someone who understood the true meaning of scorched earth tactics. The charges detonated in sequence at 0352 hours, turning 3,000 gallons of diesel fuel into a pillar of fire that rose 200 feet into the Afghan night sky. The explosion vaporized 2 of the assault team's vehicles and sent burning debris across the compound like meteorites from hell. 8 enemies down in the initial blast. 28 to go. But the explosion also announced Maria's position to every remaining attacker. She could see them converging on the motor pool area as she escaped through the tunnel system, their movements coordinated and professional despite the shocking loss of their heavy support. Her next target was the armory, where the base stored its emergency ammunition and crew-served weapons. If she could reach it before the assault team, she could turn the building into a fortress that would cost them dearly to assault. She emerged from the tunnels inside the armory's loading dock, her arms still filled with captured weapons and ammunition. The building was a concrete bunker designed to contain explosions and resist direct hits from artillery shells. From here, she could hold off an army if necessary. Maria positioned herself behind a wall of ammunition crates, her captured rifles arranged in a deadly semicircle that would allow her to maintain sustained fire without reloading. She had enough ammunition to fight a small war, and the building's construction would force the attackers to come at her through predictable approaches. They arrived exactly as she had anticipated, moving in coordinated teams while trying to breach the armory's reinforced entrances. But the building had been designed by people who understood military tactics, and every approach was covered by interlocking fields of fire from the defender's position. The first assault team hit the main entrance with breaching charges, blowing the steel door off its hinges in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. They poured through the breach with their rifles ready, only to run straight into Maria's prepared killing ground. Her fire was precise and devastating, each shot carefully aimed to punch through body armor and drop attackers with surgical efficiency. The confined space amplified the sound of gunfire until it was like standing inside a thunderstorm. But Maria's hearing protection allowed her to track movements and coordinate her defensive fire. 9 down, 10 down, 11 down, 12 down. The survivors retreated, leaving their dead stacked in the doorway like sandbags. But they were learning from their losses and adapting their tactics. The second assault came from multiple directions simultaneously, with covering fire from their remaining heavy weapons. Maria was ready for them. She triggered her defensive charges, bringing down sections of the building's interior walls to create new firing positions while simultaneously blocking the attackers' approach routes. The armory became a three-dimensional maze of concrete debris and ammunition crates, with Maria holding the central position like a spider in her web. The battle raged for 23 minutes, with the assault team losing soldiers every time they tried to advance. Maria's position was nearly impregnable, her ammunition seemed endless, and her accuracy was inhuman. Every time they thought they had her pinned down, she would emerge from a different angle with devastating fire that thinned their ranks further. 13 down, 14 down, 15 down. But even the best defensive position could be overwhelmed by superior numbers and sustained assault. The attackers had called in their air support, and Maria could hear helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Soon she would be facing rockets and cannon fire in addition to the ground assault. Time for one final surprise. Maria activated the base's emergency self-destruct system, a Cold War-era security measure that would deny the installation to hostile forces if capture became imminent. The system was designed to destroy sensitive equipment and classified materials, but Maria had modified it during her 3 years on the base. Now it would take the entire compound with it. The countdown began at T-minus 60 seconds, giving Maria just enough time to reach the underground shelter that would protect her from the blast. She could hear the assault team's radio chatter as they realized what was happening, their professional discipline cracking as they understood they had perhaps 1 minute to evacuate or die in nuclear fire. Most of them didn't make it. The explosion turned forward operating base Blackwater into a crater 50 feet deep and 200 feet across. The blast was visible from satellite imagery and registered on seismic sensors 300 miles away. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained except twisted metal and a memorial to what happened when professional killers made the mistake of cornering a Force Recon Marine in her own kitchen. Maria crawled out of the blast shelter 6 hours later, her body battered but alive. The cavalry had arrived to find only a smoking hole where the base used to be and one blood-covered woman sitting beside a hand-lettered sign that read, "Kitchen closed due to pest problem." The investigation would take months to piece together what had happened that night. Forensic evidence suggested that 25 to 36 professional soldiers had died in what appeared to be a sustained assault on a single defender. The defender had not only survived but had eliminated the entire attacking force using a combination of military tactics, improvised weapons, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The official report classified the incident under national security protocols, but word spread through the special operations community like wildfire. It became a legend told in training camps and briefing rooms around the world. The story of the mess hall cook who turned out to be the most dangerous person on the base. Maria Santos returned to civilian life 3 months later, accepting a job as head chef at a small restaurant in Montana where the only battles were fought against difficult customers and supply chain disruptions. She never spoke about what happened at Forward Operating Base Blackwater, and she never explained why she kept a complete set of military-grade cutlery in her kitchen or why her prep techniques looked suspiciously like close-quarters combat training. But every now and then, when some drunk customer got too aggressive or some food critic wrote a particularly nasty review, the other staff members would catch a glimpse of something dangerous in Maria's eyes. Something that reminded them that the quiet woman who made the best cornbread in Montana had once turned a military kitchen into a graveyard for professional killers. Some people retire from war. Others just change their battlefield. The mess hall cook had served her last meal to unwelcome guests, but Chef Santos was always ready to cook up something special for anyone foolish enough to threaten her kitchen again. The mess hall cook was gone. What remained was a force reconnaissance marine with a burning kitchen, a pile of dead enemies, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Let them come. She would be ready. But before he could respond, the kitchen erupted in automatic weapons fire as the backup teams finally arrived. The foam was cut to pieces by hundreds of rounds as multiple assault teams poured through both entrances, their weapons sweeping the room for targets. Maria rolled behind the industrial refrigerator as bullets spanged off metal surfaces around her. The wounded team leader was shouting in his native language, trying to warn his reinforcements about what they were facing. Too late. They were in her house now, and Maria Santos was done playing defense. 15 down. But how many more were coming through those doors? Time to find out exactly how many enemies thought they could invade her kitchen and live to tell about it. The real war was just beginning, and Maria had barely started cooking. Equipment. Her engineering knowledge from demolitions training told her exactly where to cut and how much pressure to release. She wasn't trying to create an explosion. That would be counterproductive in her current situation. Instead, she was creating a tactical advantage that would level the playing field. The gas began hissing softly into the kitchen air as Maria took position behind the main prep counter. She had weapons from the fallen attackers now, but this was still her kitchen, and she intended to fight this battle on her terms. The remaining assault team members burst through both entrances simultaneously, their rifles seeking targets in the red-tinged emergency lighting. They found a kitchen that seemed empty except for the growing smell of natural gas and the scattered equipment of their fallen teammates. Maria smiled grimly as she prepared to introduce them to the rest of her culinary skills. The real lesson was about to begin, and class was permanently in session. The gas concentration was almost perfect. Just a few more seconds, and she would show these invaders exactly what happened when you brought gunfire into a professional kitchen. The connected dining area, their voices becoming more urgent as they called out to their missing teammates. Maria could hear them regrouping, their leader barking orders about clearing the building and securing the communications equipment. This wasn't a random attack. They were after something specific. She moved through her kitchen like a deadly ghost, using her intimate knowledge of every cabinet, every shelf, every piece of equipment to stay invisible. When the third attacker entered through the main door, silhouetted perfectly against the dim corridor lighting, Maria's paring knife found his carotid artery before he could raise his weapon. 3 down. But now they knew they weren't alone. The radio chatter turned sharp and professional as the assault team realized they had walked into something unexpected. Commands were barked in multiple languages as they tried to establish what had happened to their advance team. Flashlight beams began sweeping the kitchen in coordinated patterns. Maria smiled grimly as she pressed herself against the industrial dishwasher. She had spent 3 years learning every shadow in this kitchen. Now it was time to show these intruders that some shadows bite back. The hunt was about to begin in earnest.